All right, strap in, everybody. Let's take a deep dive into a Dahmer monster. The Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Mm.
You guys sent over a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
The trailer, some Wikipedia entries, even behind-the-scenes interviews. You really want to get the full picture on this one, huh? So,
Oh, yeah.
let's do it.
Definitely a lot to cover.
Yeah.
I mean, this show
Yeah,
really got people talking for good reason.
for sure.
I mean, it tackles some really, really heavy stuff. Not just
Yeah,
the
but-
crimes, but
Yeah,
like
yeah.
the psychology of a serial killer, the systemic failures that,
Yeah.
allowed it all to happen.
Yeah, even just watching that trailer, I got chills, Especially that one line, "This man tried to kill me." And then the response is, "You're saying there's nothing you can do about that."
Mm.
Seems like the show really digs into, the police apathy, the racial bias, all that stuff that allowed Dahmer to continue his crimes for
Yeah, over a decade.
over a decade.
Absolutely. And what I think is so fascinating is that it doesn't just present those issues as, background noise.
Right.
It's like they weave them into the actual story.
Yeah.
Like, you sent over an article that talked about a scene where Dahmer's pulled over by the cops and has body parts in his car,
Oh, my God.
and they just let him go.
What?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, how different things could have been,
Yeah.
How many lives might have been saved if, people had been more vigilant. Like,
It's terrifying to think about all those missed opportunities.
it is.
And speaking of missed opportunities, one of the Wikipedia entries mentioned that he was actually arrested for sexual assault before his killing spree even began.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He served like a year, was released, and then moved in with his grandmother. It's like the system almost set him up
Right.
to continue these horrific acts.
I know, it's crazy, right? Like,
Yeah.
it makes you think about these tragedies are not just about individual evil,
Yeah.
It's about the systems that fail to protect the vulnerable. And that seems like a key theme in this series.
Totally, totally. Now let's talk about the man behind the monster, Evan Peters. He plays Dahmer, and in one of the interviews, he said he really struggled with taking on the role. He was fascinated by Dahmer's own confusion about his actions, in that Stone Phillips Dateline interview.
Right.
He wanted to kind of understand that psychology.
Yeah.
So do you think the show, successfully walks that line between depicting the horror, but also exploring, his psyche?
I mean, that's the challenge, right? It's
Yeah.
like this tightrope walk,
Yeah.
trying to give some insight without
Right.
glorifying the perpetrator.
Yeah.
And there's definitely been debate about whether the series does that well. Some say that any portrayal of Dahmer, no matter how nuanced, it's still contributing to his notoriety,
Yeah.
that it could inspire copycat crimes. And then others say that the psychology part is crucial to understand how someone could even do these things
Yeah.
and hopefully preventing it in the future.
Totally.
So, yeah.
Raises a lot of questions about the responsibility of, filmmakers when they're dealing with such sensitive subject matter.
Yeah, definitely.
Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about Glenda Cleveland, his neighbor. You sent over a behind-the-scenes interview where Niecy Nash, who plays her, describes this scene called the quote-unquote sandwich scene, where she confronts him.
Oh, wow.
It sounds super tense.
Yeah.
What stood out to you about her role in the story?
Her story is actually heartbreaking because it underscores those failures that we were just talking about.
Right.
She tried to alert the authorities so many times,
Yeah.
and her concerns were just ignored,
Wow.
largely because she was a Black woman in a predominantly white neighborhood.
Right.
And that sandwich scene, as Nash describes it, is just like this perfect example of that dynamic. She's terrified, but she puts on this brave face and confronts him directly. It says so much about her courage
Yeah.
and resilience in the face of, danger and indifference.
It really highlights that human cost of these crimes,
Yeah.
beyond just the victims themselves. It's like those ripple effects of evil extend so far.
For sure.
Now, there's another person's perspective I'm super curious about. Lionel Dahmer,
Okay.
Jeffrey's father.
Right.
Richard Jenkins plays him. And he actually researched his book, A Father's Story, to prepare for the role.
Wow.
So what does the series, reveal about Lionel's struggles in, coming to terms with his son's actions?
It's just another layer to the story,
Yeah.
Imagine the guilt, the confusion, just thinking, where did I go wrong?
Right.
And the show explores how he tries to understand his son, to reconcile, the child he raised with the monster he became.
It's just,
It's a deeply human struggle that
yeah,
anyone who's ever, wondered about good and evil, nature versus nurture,
totally.
can connect with.
It's like Shakespearean in
Yeah.
its tragedy.
Yeah.
This father grappling with his son's sins. Speaking of sins, I'm ready for one of those details from the source material that just makes your jaw drop.
Okay.
What else we got?
Well, you mentioned before that he was arrested for sexual assault
Right.
before the murders. But what's even more disturbing is that he was actually convicted.
Wow.
Found guilty, but only served a year in prison.
Seriously?
Yeah.
A year? That seems so lenient.
It does.
It
Considering. And it really speaks to this larger issue of how the justice system often fails to address sexual assault.
Right.
Especially when the victims are marginalized or don't have a voice.
Totally.
And the show doesn't shy away from pointing that out.
It's crazy. It's a reminder that even when the system appears to work, it can still fall tragically short.
Yeah.
This deep dive is already so much more than just a recap of a show.
Right.
Like, we're talking about societal issues, morality, the very nature of evil.
It's a lot.
I'm hooked. What else is there?
Well, we've talked a lot about the darkness, but there's this glimmer of hope. One of the articles mentions that Glenda Cleveland actually advocated for a memorial to be built
Oh, wow.
on the site of the Oxford apartments where Dahmer committed many of his crimes.
Wow.
She wanted it to be a place to honor the victims and, remind people about speaking out against injustice.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Like turning this place of horror
Right.
into a place for, remembrance and reflection.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
It speaks to the power of the human spirit
Yeah.
to find meaning even in the face of tragedy.
Absolutely.
So, yeah,
It's powerful. Really is.
it is.
And it's a testament to her strength and her resilience. She refused to be silenced.
Yeah,
And even in death, continues to inspire others to fight for justice.
for sure. And, speaking of fighting for justice, there's another aspect of the Dahmer case I think we need to talk about.
Okay.
The victims' families
Oh,
and
excellent.
their fight for recognition and accountability.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. We can't forget about the human cost of these crimes, like the families left behind to grieve and pick up the pieces. So what did you find in the sources about their experiences?
Well, one of the articles really goes into the trauma that the families endured.
Yeah.
After his arrest, they were dealing with grief, fear, and this constant reminder of their loved one's horrific fate. It's unimaginable.
Really is. It's hard to even fathom that level of pain. And you mentioned earlier that he actually received fan mail in prison.
Yeah, I know.
That must have been so difficult for the families to process.
For sure. It's this strange thing,
Yeah.
this fascination people have with serial killers. Like,
Right.
they become like these dark celebrities.
Yeah.
But for the families, it's just this constant reminder of their loss and their pain.
Yeah. And in the midst of all that pain, they had to fight for accountability. One of the Wikipedia entries mentions this $14 million lawsuit filed against the city of Milwaukee on behalf of the families,
Wow.
alleging negligence on the part of the police. And given all the missed opportunities we've talked about,
Right.
it seems like a valid claim.
It does. It argued that the police, through their inaction, through their biases, really contributed to their loved ones' deaths.
Wow.
Sadly, it was settled out of court for less than $900,000.
Wow. That seems like a slap in the face considering everything.
Right. It just shows the limitations of the legal system. Like, no amount of money can bring back their loved ones or erase the trauma.
Really is a sobering reminder that justice is often elusive,
Yeah.
especially for those who are marginalized or don't have the resources to fight. Now, kind of switching gears a little bit, this show was massively popular. People could not stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? What is it about true crime that captivates us so much?
There's something about looking into the darkest parts of the human psyche that's both, like, repulsive but also fascinating.
Yeah.
Maybe it's morbid curiosity. We want to understand why these horrific acts happen. Or maybe it's the fear, the unsettling realization that this evil could exist anywhere, even in ordinary people.
It's like a car crash. You don't want to look, but you can't help yourself. And with Dahmer, whose crimes were so depraved, so beyond comprehension, maybe that fascination is just amplified.
Yeah, for sure. He becomes almost mythical.
Right.
A symbol of pure evil. But that can be dangerous, We risk losing sight of the victims, the human cost, when we just focus on the monster.
Totally. And that brings us back to those ethical considerations, right?
Yeah.
How do you tell these stories without exploiting the victims without turning the killer into some kind of anti-hero.
Right. It's such a delicate balance. There's no easy answer. And this show has been criticized for maybe contributing to that, sensationalizing his story,
Right.
focusing too much on him and not enough on the victims. But it also sparked a lot of important conversations about systemic racism, homophobia, the failures of the justice system. So
It's interesting. Despite all the controversy, Dahmer got a ton of awards. The Wikipedia entry mentions a Golden Globe for Evan Peters and Emmy for Niecy Nash.
yeah.
What do you think those awards say about the show and its impact?
I mean, it's complex, right?
Yeah.
On one hand, the awards recognize the talent of the actors and the achievements of the show itself.
Right.
But it also makes you wonder, does awarding a show about something so horrific contribute to its glorification?
Totally. It's like we're trying to balance the artistic merit with the moral implications, and it deserves more than a yes or no answer.
For sure. And it's bigger than just Dahmer, too.
Right.
It's about how we view true crime as a whole, What are we even looking for when we watch these shows? Are we looking for justice,
Right.
understanding, entertainment? And what responsibility do the creators have in shaping that experience?
Yeah. It's a lot to unpack, but I'm glad we're having this conversation. It's important to be critical and to question our own motivations and to make sure we're not perpetuating harm in the pursuit of entertainment. Now, let's talk about the music. The Wikipedia entry says the soundtrack was composed by Nick Cave and Warren Ellis, known for their dark, atmospheric sounds.
Yeah, their music definitely adds this haunting layer to the series.
Right.
It really amplifies those feelings of unease. It's interesting, though, because one of the interviews you sent says Evan Peters was actually listening to this totally different song, Please Don't Go, to prepare for certain scenes. It's like an 80s classic, not exactly Nick Cave vibes.
Totally different.
Right.
Makes you wonder if they used a mix of original score and existing songs to capture the different time periods, the moods of the series.
Right. It would make sense given how big the show is.
Absolutely. Speaking of how big it is, let's talk about the future of Monster. It's not a one-off, is it?
No, it's not. According to Wikipedia, Netflix has already renewed it as an anthology series.
Oh, wow.
The second season is going to be about the Menendez brothers, another huge case that, captivated everyone back in the 90s.
Oh, I remember that case.
Yeah.
It was all over the news. It'll be fascinating to see how the creators approach this story, given all the conversations and critiques about Dahmer.
Right. It'll be interesting to see if they do things differently this time, maybe focusing more on the victims or exploring the ethical questions more directly.
Yeah. And I'm also curious how they'll handle the music for that one.
Oh, yeah.
Will they go for a completely different sound or stick with that Nick Cave, Warren Ellis darkness? It'll be something to keep an ear out for.
Definitely.
Now, before we jump to the Menendez brothers and the future of Monster, we need to circle back to a really important story from the Dahmer case.
Okay.
Tony Hughes. You mentioned him earlier, and it seems especially heartbreaking. What can you tell us about him and how the show portrays it?
Well, Tony Hughes was deaf. He was an aspiring model who met Dahmer in 1991. His story's told in episode 6.
Oh, wow.
Which a lot of people have said was a really sensitive and moving portrayal.
I bet it's hard to watch knowing how it ends.
It is. But it's also a really powerful testament to his life, his dreams. The episode focuses on his relationship with his mother, his aspirations to be a model, and just his desire to find love and connection. It reminds us that each victim was a person, not just a number.
Yeah. And it's crucial to remember that, to honor their memory and acknowledge, the whole scope of the tragedy. Now, let's talk about that behind-the-scenes interview you sent over with Ryan Murphy and the cast. I'm always so fascinated by the creative process, especially with a show like this.
I think you'll really like this interview. They talk about everything, from casting to the challenges of playing such complex and disturbing characters.
Okay, let's hear it.
All right. Yeah, one of the things they talk about is Niecy Nash, who plays Glenda Cleveland.
Right.
She actually said that she took the role without even reading the script.
Wow.
Because she trusted Ryan Murphy's vision that much.
That's amazing.
It really says a lot about, their relationship and how much people respect him as a director.
Yeah, he's known for pushing actors to do things they've never done before.
Right.
It's like he saw this dramatic depth in her
Yeah.
that maybe even she didn't know she had.
Yeah, and she definitely delivers a powerful performance.
Oh, for sure.
Speaking of powerful performances, Ryan Murphy actually directed 2 of the most important scenes himself. The
Oh,
opening scene of the first episode,
okay.
and then that really intense sandwich scene between Glenda and Dahmer.
Those are such pivotal moments,
They are.
full of so much tension.
Right.
I can only imagine being on set and, like, witnessing those performances firsthand.
Yeah, Murphy said it was like seeing two actors at the top of their game.
Wow.
And he's not wrong the way Niecy Nash conveys Glenda's fear, but also her determination.
Right.
And then the way Evan Peters just embodies Dahmer's creepy calmness.
It's chilling.
It is. It's captivating.
I'm really struck by how Nash describes her approach to that sandwich scene, you know?
Yeah.
She said Glenda was terrified, but she was trying so hard to stay in control,
Right.
to appear strong, even though she was so vulnerable.
Yep.
It just adds another layer to that scene, knowing what she was going through internally.
It's a perfect example of how a nuanced performance can just elevate a scene,
Yeah,
give it so much more meaning.
totally.
And it really emphasizes that this series isn't just about Dahmer the monster.
Right.
It's about how his actions affected everyone.
Yeah.
The victims, their families, the people who tried to stop him.
It's a much bigger story.
It is.
Speaking of Evan Peters, I have to ask about those glasses.
Oh, yeah.
They're so iconic. So Dahmer.
Right.
Did he wear them the whole time while filming?
He did, and he actually talks about it in the interview.
Oh, wow.
He said he wanted them to feel like a natural part of him.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't even have to think about them.
Right.
They even tried on a bunch of different pairs to find the perfect ones for each time period.
It's those little details that make it all so believable.
Yeah.
The glasses, the way he moved, his voice. Like, Evan Peters really became Dahmer.
He did.
But it must have been really hard to be in that headspace for so long.
Yeah. He talks about how he stayed in character as much as he could
Right.
during filming because it was too emotionally draining to keep switching back and forth.
I can imagine.
And to prepare for the role, he would actually listen to this 45-minute audio composite of Dahmer's voice every day
Oh, my God.
to get the accent right and really get inside his head.
Wow, that's some serious dedication.
It is. It's both fascinating and a little scary to think about the things actors do
Right.
to bring these characters to life.
Totally. You know, we've talked about all the darkness and controversy.
Yeah.
But there's also this, like, element of hope
Right.
and resilience. Like with
Yeah.
Glenda Cleveland.
Yeah.
She fought so hard for justice, even when everyone ignored her.
She did.
And just the fact that the show gives her a voice is so powerful.
Absolutely. And at the end of the day, I think that's one of the most important takeaways.
Okay.
The importance of speaking up, even when it's hard.
Totally.
Glenda Cleveland shows us that one person can make a difference.
Yeah.
That even in the darkest times, there's always hope.
That's beautiful.
And maybe that's a good place to wrap up this part of our deep dive into Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
Yeah,
It's a story that really makes you think, that challenges you,
it does.
and ultimately forces you to face some uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world.
For sure. We've gone deep into the mind of a serial killer.
Yeah.
We talked about the things that went wrong and allowed his crimes to happen.
Right.
And we've really wrestled with the ethics of putting this story on screen.
Did a lot.
But we've also seen how strong the human spirit can be.
Absolutely.
That desire for justice, the importance of remembering the victims
It's all.
whose lives were cut way too short.
And before we move on, I want to leave you with this thought. If you were Glenda Cleveland, knowing what you know now, how would you have reacted? Would you have fought as hard as she did?
It's something to think about.
Yeah.
It reminds us that we all have a part to play in making the world a better place.
It really does. That's a powerful question to consider.
And on that note, let's take a quick break before we jump into the next part of our deep dive.
So yeah, in the interview, they talk a lot about how they approach the story,
Right.
bringing these characters to life.
Right.
And one thing that stood out to me was what Niecy Nash said about Ryan Murphy and, like, his casting.
Oh, yeah.
She said she actually took the role of Glenda Cleveland without even reading the script.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because she trusted him that much.
Wow.
Which, I mean, says a lot about their relationship and just his reputation in the industry.
Totally. He's known for really pushing actors out of their comfort zones. You know? It's like he saw this potential in her that maybe even she hadn't fully realized.
And she really killed it in the role.
She did, for sure.
And you know what else? Ryan Murphy actually directed 2 of the biggest scenes in the series himself.
Oh, wow. Which one?
The opening scene of the first episode, and then that super intense sandwich scene between Glenda and Dahmer.
Those are both so powerful.
Right, so much tension.
I can only imagine what it was like to be there on set.
Yeah, Murphy said it was amazing.
Yeah.
Like watching 2 masters at work.
Wow. And I'm thinking about what Nash said about that sandwich scene.
Yeah.
How Glenda was completely terrified.
Right.
But she was trying so hard to
Mhm.
stay composed.
Right.
Like Project Strength, even though she was incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's amazing how she brought that internal struggle to life.
It really shows you how powerful and nuanced performance can be.
Totally. And it reinforces the idea that this show isn't just about Dahmer as this, like, monstrous figure.
Exactly.
It's about the impact he had on everyone around him.
Uh-huh.
The ripple effect of his action.
The victims, the families,
Right.
the people who tried to stop him.
And speaking of, Evan Peters playing Dahmer, we got to talk about those glasses.
Oh, yeah, the glass.
So iconic.
So Dahmer.
Did he wear them the whole time during filming?
He actually did. He said in the interview he wanted them to feel like a part of him. So he wouldn't be distracted by them.
Yeah.
They even tried on a bunch of different pairs.
Really?
To find the perfect ones for each time period.
It's amazing. Those little details really add up.
They do.
To create such a convincing portrayal.
It's true. He really transformed himself for this role.
He did. It must have been so intense.
Yeah, emotionally draining.
To spend so much time in that headspace.
And he talks about how he pretty much stayed in character the whole time.
Wow, really?
It was just too much to keep going in and out.
Yeah.
And get this, to prepare, he would listen to this 45-minute audio recording of Dahmer's voice every day.
Oh my God, every day.
To get the accent down and really get into his head.
That's wild.
It's pretty incredible what actors will do.
It is. It's fascinating and a little disturbing.
Yeah.
We've talked about all the dark aspects of this story.
Yeah, the controversy.
But there's also this, glimmer of hope.
Right.
This resilience.
Yeah.
Like with Glenda Cleveland.
Yeah.
She just never gave up. Even when everyone was telling her to be quiet.
And the show really gives her the recognition she deserves.
It does, and that's so powerful.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from all of this. The importance of standing up for what's right.
Totally.
Even when it feels impossible.
Yeah, Glenda Cleveland's story really shows us that
one person can make a difference.
Yeah, and that even in the face of such darkness, there's always hope.
And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our deep dive into Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story.
This has been a heavy one, that's for sure.
It has. We've really gone deep into some pretty dark places.
We explored the mind of a serial killer.
Yeah.
We talked about how the system failed to stop him.
And we looked at how we even tell these kinds of stories ethically.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but we've also seen the strength of the human spirit.
Absolutely. The fight for justice.
Right.
And the importance of remembering those who were lost.
So as we end our deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
What would you have done if you were in Glenda Cleveland's shoes? Knowing what you know now, would you have fought as hard as she did?
That's a powerful question.
It is. It's a reminder that we all have a part to play.
In making the world a better place.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you all for joining us on this deep dive into Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.